Hello everybody, recording live from somewhere. This is Zach Couples with episode number 45 of the Movement Debrief. And tonight, ladies and gentlemen, it's gonna be a rock solid debrief with y'all. We're gonna talk about Diastasis Recti, or if you're from the Prague school, Diastasis Recti. What do you do for that? We're gonna talk about useless exercises, especially in the rehabilitation realm. What are some good time wasters that you should not be doing? What are some better options instead? And last but not least, we're gonna talk about not the Bloods, but the Crips, CRPS. That's what's on docket. Questions asked from the people, answered for the people, by this people, fam recognized fam. Before I dive in, quick housekeeping. There is signups for the Human Matrix because I've had people ask me September 15th and 16th. I'll link it in the show notes. Otherwise, let's debrief, shall we? First question comes from Courtney. Thoughts for best treatment of Diastasis Recti? I'll give you my thoughts because I actually saw someone recently who had this or was being treated for this. And let's dive in. So, Diastasis Recti, what is that? Basically, what that is you have a separation of the linea alba between your rectus abdominis muscles. So the six pack, if you put your finger and you run it down right the middle, you'll feel like there's a little divot between the six pack where it is or where it should be, whatever you got going on. Basically feel that. Now, if that were, I believe it's 2.6 or 2.7 centimeters or greater, guess what? You have a diastasis recti. No bueno. Basically what's happening is because the abdominal wall has stretched out to such a high degree, problems, fam. Rarely is it symptomatic, but it's not ideal for a lot of reasons. You can't generate as much tension in the abdominal region. That's kind of a big deal. I also would think it has some problematic issues in terms of gut displacement as we move. Not gonna have a good time. Typically, diastasis recti happens in de bebés and in pregnant women because in the latter case, the abdominal wall is a bit more stretched out. So those are the types of people who that would happen with. And what do you do for it? Well, guess what, folks? The same thing as you do for everyone else. You start with the axial skeleton position, you work your way out. I think you could probably have a diastasis recti in either someone who has a wide or a narrow infrasternal angle, because that's where I look first with these things, is what's the infrasternal angle? I could justify that linea alba pulling apart either from too much rectus overactivity concentrically or an eccentric action, either way. But you have to address that first and foremost. You do that, theoretically, hopefully, that gets the abdominals working a little bit more synergistically, and then you can be in business. And the rest of it is just slowly exposing them to more and more challenging things that may create a little bit of increased abdominal activation, but not lead to an increase in spreading of the linea alba. Things you want to be cautious of early on with someone who has diastasis recti. Too excessive of abdominal contraction. So I would lay off things like planks or things where you're getting a little bit more anterior loading, at least on the early side of things, because you don't want to make the problem worse. Other things, crunches, probably no bueno. I don't know why most people would do them anyways unless it's in a get-up. But those are the types of things that I'm thinking of when I want to not make the diastasis recti worse. Those would be like your early contraindications. But I follow the same protocol that I do with everyone else when I'm working with someone who has this condition. Addressing the infrasternal angle is paramount, and then training the abdominals based on what that angle is in the early phases, progressing them towards maybe the opposite end of the spectrum in the later phases, and you should be in business. What I mean by that, if I have someone who has a narrow infrasternal angle, Typically with those people, because of the nature of that angle and what we're trying to do to the rib cage, I emphasize more sagittal plane, reaching based activities, not to get the six pack because we don't want crunching, but reaching so you can get internal obliques and transversus abdominis. And I like rotational based activities for these people as well to drive rib internal rotation. So for that, what I would do is maybe things like chops, lifts. Eventually you can work towards a get up. Like I think that that's so appropriate. Any type of quadruped based activities, all of this stuff is good. If I'm someone who has a wide infrasternal angle, then what I'm trying to do is get more concentric abdominal activity. I might do things like overhead to start, light, ab wheel, maybe not so much in the early phases, but something like that. Some type of rollout with a physio ball is appropriate in my opinion. Any type of side plank variations, because if the abs are more eccentrically oriented, you want to do things that reverse that. And those positions are very good at doing so. So that would be other possible options I would go for. But once you've gotten that squared away, you've established variability, then it's simply training. You get them squatting, you get them deadlifting, you do them pushing, pulling, all of those things. They should not be limited by that once you've squared away abdominal position. So to summarize, diastasis recti, spreading of the linea alba, no bueno. We want to do things that normalize abdominal activity, looking at the infrasternal angle, crucial in my opinion. Do that, then is build power, build capacity, treat them like regular people, and you ought to be in business. Courtney, good question. Let me just adjust this camera a little bit. Nope, screw it. Next question comes from Tyler. What are the biggest wastes of time as far as exercises in the rehab process? Perhaps that used to be / still are popular. That is a great question, Tyler. Let's see if I can answer that. I don't think many activities are useless. I think what often I see in the rehab realm is people have one goal in mind, but they use the wrong method to achieve that goal. Let me give you an example. Say you have someone who's post-op rotator cuff repair, and you're doing activities to try to get their shoulder stronger. A lot of times, many people will do shoulder external rotations, internal rotations, scaptions, these types of isolation-based exercises with hopes that that will get their cuff and the repair stronger and they'll be in business. The problem is that those movements are not typically how the rotator cuff works when we're doing stuff. To get stronger here, I don't need to do this. One of the actions of the rotator cuff musculature is creating dynamic stability of the humerus. So if I'm trying to do this and thinking it's going to transfer to me doing this well, you got another thing coming. You're training a concentric action and hoping for a stability or compression-based action to transfer. Not always the case. You can't squat and expect to be better at a bench press. Questionable carryover. But if your goal is hypertrophy of the rotator cuff musculature, for whatever reason, maybe you're a bodybuilder, then maybe a side-lying external rotation is appropriate. Good exercise, but know why you're programming that exercise. That has to be the key with most anything. And I see that a lot. Or maybe your goal is stability, whatever that means, or increasing proprioception, or working on balance. How about that? And you utilize an unbalanced activity such as a Bosu ball squat or something silly like that. I've beaten that dead horse. Check out the last 2 debriefs. The point being with these is admirable intent, awful execution. If your person can't do like a single leg RDL or a step up or a single leg squat or anything single leg for that matter, To me, that's a great way to improve balance. But if they can't do that, why are you putting them on an unstable surface? You have a good goal, but you have the wrong solution for said goal. And I think that's the biggest thing with exercise selection in general. What is your desired outcome? And what is the most efficient method at achieving that desired outcome? And you can do a ton of activities. And I don't think like a lot of the stuff that people do in the rehab realm, well, I find oftentimes some, not offensive, but just why are we doing this? Is because of that problem. Having one goal in mind and not having the right solution to meet that goal. Other things that I think might be a waste of time in the rehab realm. Not loading your patients enough. Now here, in my new spot in Susanville, California, I have a hard time with this because of equipment constraints. The heaviest dumbbell that I have is 10 pounds. Then my next jump is my 62-pound beast of a kettlebell. I don't got much to work with. And you have that as a constraint. But a lot of times, even when you don't have those constraints, you still see people giving band exercises to individuals who are really strong and probably need a different type of loading parameter to make changes in the tissues, or at least prepare them for the activity that they're trying to perform. So I think underloading is a big problem in our field, because we have to try to bridge the gap somehow between what that individual is trying to do outside of here and what methods we have in here to meet that. And the forces are just so great out in the environment that a band and a 10-pound weight aren't going to do a whole lot. So upping intensity, critical. Other things that are useless. I'm just looking around the clinic to see if there's anything else that's useless. I don't think so. I really, like, I don't want to, I'm not offended by a lot of exercises. Like I said, I think the biggest thing with whatever you do, whether you're a clinician or a coach, is making sure you do things that are going to help move the needle forward for your client. And if you choose the proper exercises to be able to meet that need, don't do things that are not going to meet that need, whether it's unstable surface training, underloading, or picking an exercise that's not going to help meet the goal, such as the side-lying external rotation for being able to improve dynamic stability and function of an arm. If you follow those rules, you should be okay, and your clients should meet their goals a bit more effectively. So Tyler, great question, and I'm glad I didn't get too riled up or juiced up about that, because sometimes I see things when I'm practicing and I get juiced up. Last question. This is from Sue. How do you help patients that have complex regional pain syndrome, or CRPS, or the CRPS? Why do you think I'm blueing? All right. So what is complex regional pain syndrome, or CRPS, or the CRPS? What that is it's a condition where you get an exaggerated response to a oftentimes not innocuous stimulus, but the response that the body undergoes does not match the initial injury. So sometimes after surgeries or after a crush injury to a foot or an arm, typically that's where complex regional pain syndrome occurs, you get this hypersensitivity to almost everything. Very light touch leads to substantial amounts of pain. You get trophic changes in the hand, so sometimes the hand atrophies, gets a ton of swelling, redness, or the leg from just minor things. I've even seen this for someone who had a flu shot and they had complex regional pain syndrome all down their arm. A lot of those same changes that we've talked about. It's a terrible condition. You don't want to wish it on your worst enemy because it's so painful, even just the lightest things. And it's a very tough condition to treat for a ton of reasons. There's lots of other changes that occur not here, but just within the central nervous system. For example, if you look at some of the research by Mosley, and he does some neat treatments with this. I'll see if I can link it in the show notes. I just might have to dig into the crates, so to speak. But a lot of times visual midline shifts along with developing complex regional pain syndrome. So what can happen is the visual perception may be shifted away from the stimulus or the area that's affected. And one of the treatments that Mosley was playing with was using prism lenses to shift the midline back towards center so they could have a little bit greater perception of the affected limb. So you have changes like that. You have changes in body spatial representations in the brain. Lots of wild and crazy things. Knowing all this, what do you do about it? Well, I'm glad you guys asked. I would treat this condition the same way I would any other condition. You need to restore variability as best as you can. You need to establish power, establish capacity. I think there's a few other things that we can do locally that's impactful, but those tenets still reign true. Because think about it, guys. If I have limitations in motion along the extremity, that's going to alter neurodynamics. The nerves are not going to be able to excurge to the best of their capabilities. It's going to alter lymphedema, or lymphatic flow. It's going to alter blood flow. It's going to offer a lot of different things because the tissues can't excurge to the best of their capabilities. So what you have to do is make sure that that can happen. So doing a lot of the breathing-based stuff that I've gone over ad nauseum is big for these people. Not just from restoring variability, but also the exhalation, increasing parasympathetic nervous system activity, which could potentially help with painful states. And by the way, guys, CRPS used to be called reflex sympathetic dystrophy. And there's two types of CRPS. One of them does have an autonomic component. So anything you can do that impacts autonomics favorably, you probably ought to do that. That would be piece one. Now, you might do that and they could still have a lot of pain, which will limit the capabilities of what you can do to the affected extremity, whether it's upper or lower. So I think there's a lot of neat local treatments that you could do for these people. And what it does, what I would do is basically try to create any type of sensory input in that area that you can that's minimally or not painful. Graded motor imagery, which I wrote a blog post about a long time ago, is huge for these people. There's some evidence supporting that this is effective for this type of condition. What you would do for that is you would first work on left-right discrimination. The NOI group, I'll link them in the show notes. They have some great apps that you can do that help work on this. But basically what you would do is you have this app and you're trying to differentiate whether the hand is a left hand or a right hand, or the foot's a right foot or a left foot. And the better you get at this, the more that refreshes the picture of the affected area in the brain. So it's an incredibly useful tool in that regard. And a lot of times, it's a way to activate those motor areas without experiencing pain. Although people that I have treated who have CRPS sometimes will get pain with that. Once you've gotten to, last I read, correct me if I'm wrong, but last I read, once you get to about 80% accuracy with about a 2-second move between pictures, or 2-second decision between pictures, then you can move on to visualization. And what you would do for this is, in the first person, have that person visualize them doing things with the area that is hurting, whether it's arm or leg. And sometimes this can be painful because of the increased sensitivity. I've had that with someone who had complex regional pain syndrome. So you have to be mindful of that. The goal is to get them to visualize most of the activities that they want to do at a terminal end without any discomfort. Once they've done that adequately, then what I would do is move on to a two-phased approach. Sensory discrimination, 1, mirror therapy, 2. Sensory discrimination. This is different from exposing people to just different sensations, but what you're trying to do here with this is you're trying to get them to differentiate between different stimuli. For example, you might take a paper clip and test sharp on one side, so the pointed end, that would be your sharp, and then the rounded end would be your dull. And you would go along the affected area and say, hey, is this sharp, is this dull? Eyes closed. You could test all different types of sensations. You could give a couple different surfaces, like maybe a shag rug and something that's not a shag rug. I was thinking of sandpaper, but that's cruel, don't do that. But like a shag carpet or a feather, and say, hey, is this the shag carpet or is this the feather? As you brush those things along the affected extremity. Also doing things like graphesthesia, where you're writing numbers or letters somewhere on the affected area. All of these things. AstroTurf, SF Sports Massage, that's a good idea. Yes, get some AstroTurf. Get the Mondo surface for the track, how about that? But anything like that would be useful, and just having them differentiate those sensations, because you're just trying to do everything in your power to expose stimuli to that area without pain. Alongside that, mirror therapy works pretty well. What you would do is, if, let's say my hand is involved, I put a mirror down the middle. If my right hand was involved, I would look on the left side. The mirror would be facing my left hand, and so I would look at the mirror, and as I'm looking this way, it would appear as though that is my right hand, even though it is not. And what you can do is you can move the hand in various ways, or move the foot, whatever. And what that does is it creates a visual trick in the brain saying, oh my gosh, I'm moving the area that's been hurting for so long and it doesn't hurt. That's so cool. And it works pretty slick. So you would move the hand, you could do things where you're moving both hands but not seeing the affected limb move. All of these things are very helpful. I think there's a lot of other different sensory cues that you could do. Spending more time on that area, so when you're interacting with the person, maybe if it's their right arm, you're spending more time on their right side, so they have to attend to that area more, because the research shows that these people do not attend effectively or have attention on the body space that's involved. So doing anything you can on the right side, if that was the area affected, is huge. Even doing things where you're making noises on that area, so they have to hear stuff over on that side. Anything you can do, incredibly helpful. But those are really some of the big treatments that I would consider with someone who has complex regional pain syndrome. And you can also do things where you're moving basically every other area adjacent to the affected extremity, or if you look at the somatosensory homunculus, moving adjacent parts along that homunculus. Also another thing that could potentially be in fact impactful to help restore that body image. And I'll link the somatosensory homunculus in the show notes if you haven't seen that. But I remember a story Adrian Lowe was telling me when I went to his class, and he was having someone who had complex regional pain syndrome, and he was having them put Monopoly pieces in their mouth and having them guess which one it was. Or no, actually I think it was frozen shoulder, but he was doing that because the facial representation in the mouth are right next to the arm in the somatosensory homunculus. So theoretically, if you make that portion of the homunculus a bit more fresh, it better differentiates from the adjacent area. I've never tried it. I would go with some of the other stuff that you could do, but the thought process makes sense to me. So that would be another thing that you could potentially work on, is just differentiating the surrounding structures within the homunculus. But once you've done that, you've restored variability, hopefully symptoms have subsided, and then it's just a matter of building fitness and conditioning. Alongside that, I think any type of conditioning or aerobic work is going to be big for these people, because aerobic exercise has been demonstrated to be very impactful for people who are in pain. It also has been shown, if I remember the research correctly, has been shown to improve pain tolerance. Aerobic exercise would be great, increasing blood flow systemically. Lots of favorable things can happen when you utilize aerobic exercise. So that would be my treatment for someone with CRPS. Restore variability, Work on restoring the somatosensory homunculus in that area by means of graded motor imagery and sensory discrimination. Utilize aerobic exercise to build conditioning, and once they are less symptomatic, start using power and capacity, and especially so on the non-involved side. Is there a non-involved side? The opposite side in the other areas, and the more you do those things, the more likely these people are going to have a successful outcome. So Sue, phenomenal question, and I think that's a good stopping point for us tonight. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that the quality was good, because I decided to stay at work today to see if we could not have as much lag, and no one's complained, so I'm assuming you guys thought it was dope. If you're wondering where you can find out more about me, I'll tell you. First, go to zachcouples.com. Here's what you're going to want to do while you're there. Go to the right, subscribe to the newsletter. Here's what you're going to get. You're going to get about 3 hours worth of this joker talking about pain, about respiration. You're going to get 50 pages of notes, give or take, mostly take. You're going to get a free acute to chronic workload calculator. You're going to get weekend learning goodies every Friday. I'm going to give you links if you want to learn something. It'll be a short email, but it'll be a lot of interesting stuff and some dope tunes. Respect. Once you've done that, go to the online services page. I'll help you 3 ways. We can either do a movement consultation. If you're toy restricted, maybe you're a little sore and you've tried some stuff and maybe you think moving better would help you, I can be your guy. Check me out there. We can also do mentoring. If you want to understand the concepts that I talked about tonight better, if you want to learn how to apply this with your patients or your clientele, if you want to work on variability and integrate that into your practice, hit me up for the mentorship sessions. Next, what you want to do is go to online fitness training. Maybe you want to get jacked. Maybe you're post-rehab. Maybe you're fat loss. I can help you with all those things. We'll write a program, go through the month, make sure you meet your goals, and you'll be in business. Hit me up for that. Once you're done with zachcouples.com, please subscribe to iTunes and Stitcher if you do that. Zach Couples Show. Because guess what, people? There's 44 other debriefs that you can listen to. And if you want to look at me for 44 of them, great. If you don't, because I wouldn't, you could listen to me in your car on iTunes or Stitcher. Hit me up in those areas. Once you're done with that, let's go social media. First, hit Facebook /ZCouples. I put out videos twice a week explaining some stuff. Check it out. You'll definitely want to go to Twitter. My handle is @ZCouples. Definitely hit me up there, because I'll tweet stuff. Maybe we'll tweet back and all that kind of stuff that you do for Twitter. And of course, that Instagram, baby. Zach, Z-A-C, Couples, C-U-P-P-L-E-S. Definitely hit me up on Instagram. Last but not least, you go to YouTube, search Zach Couples. You'll find my channel. Got tons of exercise, more than you can shake a stick at. Thank you guys so much for listening in. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your night. I want you to keep it real, but not to the extent where things go wrong. Stay hungry, stay learning, stay moving, and I'll see you next time. Deuces.